they said it was impossible. How did this happen? We were so proud. We were so happy. We were so excited. It was the biggest thing that man had ever done. It was the pinnacle of man's achievement. You know, all these inventions and wonderful things that they had built, and this was the ultimate. The Titanic, the ship. It was so big, so beautiful. I spent half my life savings for a ticket, and I brought everything I owned, and it was wonderful. The first class. I was treated like royalty, and the riches and the beauty, and you felt like you were the only person in the whole world. The third class passengers, the poor immigrants, they were put way far away. We didn't even see them. We didn't even know they were there. Everything was about our comfort and about our luxury and about our joy. It was unsinkable. They said it was impossible for it to sink. They said God himself couldn't sink this ship. Is that what went wrong? That we were too proud? That we thought man could do anything? So was Titanic kind of a Tower of Babel? Is that why? Was I too proud? I remember in the boats, when they were putting us on the boats, the first class passengers got to go first. As if those other ones, their lives weren't as important as ours. I was too proud. And now, everything I own, all my wonderful jewels and all my clothes and all the things that I thought made me a worthwhile person, they're at the bottom of the sea. And now I'm a third class passenger just like them, except for this. And it's not really worth anything. As I was getting on the boat, there was a man. I don't know his name. I don't know what class he was in. He helped me get on the boat, and he said, "Is your soul saved?" Up till that point, all I'd been thinking about was myself. And here was this man asking about my soul. He was telling people about Jesus all up and down the deck. I believe in Jesus. I have since I was a kid, but I never lived like it. And here was this man. He was going to die. The women and children got on the boats first, and the men, they knew they weren't going to make it, most of them. And he was telling other people about Jesus. He died, and I lived. Well, I'm not going to waste that gift. I'm not going to be like me anymore. I want to be more like him. Not living for my stuff, because it's all gone anyway. Maybe I can live for others like he did. So maybe something good will come out of this terrible thing. Maybe that good thing will be me.
I recognize this isn't the life vest, just so you all know. It's just a Walmart didn't have any life vests. So this is as close as we get. Don't wear one of these if you're about to drink.
All right, the 1910s. Really interesting decade. The 1900s, 1900 to 1909, we learned about last week. It was all this wonderful innovation was happening, all these wonderful inventions, all this exciting stuff. So you were here, you remember, most of you. If somebody asked you, tell me about the 1900s, what was that like? What's one thing you could tell them real quick? Yeah.
First airplane was invented.
Okay, first airplane flight. Andrews.
Chocolate bars.
Chocolate, yeah.
Rubber.
Rubber. Praise God.
Plastic.
Yes, the beginnings of plastic.
Camera.
The camera, the brown camera.
So now, what's it called? What's it called?
The lady went over the hydrophones in a barrel, yes. So people did some stupid things too that day, eh? Priscilla. Yes. Oh,
Incubators.
Ooh. She said something we didn't talk about in class. I have a feeling that's on her worksheet. The invention of the incubator as well. Rachel.
X-ray machine.
Oh, I'm finding out new stuff. This is great. Jamie.
The assembly line makes cars.
Yes, the assembly line. So things were getting faster, things were getting bigger, there were more factories. It's like, yay, this is all this stuff, the whole world, all this exciting stuff. And then the 1910s happened. And the 1910s about the only thing I could say, I mean, there were some good things that happened, but it was almost like this whole decade of these like huge tragedies. Huge, tragic things. The Titanic was one of them. We're going to be talking about that today. Another one was the Great War, which we know of as World War I, but we're not going to call it that in this class because it wasn't World War I to them. To them, it was the war to end all wars.
Sadly enough, they were wrong. So they called it the Great War, or the War to End All Wars. And then another one was the flu that came after the war that killed even more people. It was just a really bad time. So we're going to run through some of the basics, and then we're going to spend some time up here on the Titanic. So while I'm talking about some of the other facts about the 1910s, each row is going to get up. You're going to come up here. You are going to choose a girl or a guy according to what you actually are, and go back to your seat. This is going to be your person. Each one of these is a legitimate person that was on the Titanic. And you will find some of them don't have much information. Some of them have very interesting stories to them. You'll find out some information about your person. And later on, we will find out if your person survived or not. So the first row can start, and when they sit down, the next row can come up. Just do it quietly so you don't distract. Go ahead. Okay, the 1910s. Very interesting time. Great innovation and also the Great War. The population was 92 million at the beginning of the decade, and the average wage per year was $750. Anybody remember what the average wage was in 1900? Hallie? Certainly. Yes.
$600.
Very good. Good job, Tate. $600. So the wage has gone up, but not that much. In fact, there is no such thing as minimum wage at this point. So people in the factories, some of them are working for extremely low wages, especially the little kids. The littler they are, probably the less they make. But kids are still working in factories. We still have this problem. So the clothes and the fashion, if you care about that sort of thing, they still have really big hats. They're still into big hats. But their clothes, instead of doing that poofy sleeves, the mutton sleeves as they called them, and the big dress that goes out, their dresses got a little straighter, like mine, and they were still fancy for the rich people, but they got a little farther down. But their hats stayed big for a while. So if you are a woman that's probably about 18 or older, you're going to have your hair up. If you are a younger girl, you're going to have your hair down. It's kind of a sign of maturity and that sort of thing. This girl may go. You pick your stuff. If you are a boy, you're going to be wearing suits. If you are a little boy, you get to wear these nice little knickerbockers and knee socks. And you're going to look really cute in your little hat and that sort of thing. And you're probably going to hate it, but your mom's going to make you do it anyway. One thing that was interesting about this decade was the invention or the creation, whatever you want to call it, of closer to what we would call the modern day grocery store. So before that, a woman would come to the store. She needs eggs, she needs butter, she needs flour, and she needs a new hat. So she comes to the store and she brings her list and she gives it to the grocer. And the grocer's job is to go in the back and get all the things she needs and then bring it to her. That's the way it worked. But now they're starting to switch things around, and you can actually pick things for yourself. So you can actually touch the stuff, pick it out, look at it, put it in your cart or whatever, and then take it home yourself. So that changed things a lot for the way people shopped. Kind of made it a little more fun, in my opinion. The average grocery store had maybe about, I think it was about 10,000 items. No, 1,000. So 1,000 does seem like a lot. That's a lot of stuff. But if you've got like 30 cans of tomatoes, that's 30. And, you know, right now, just to give you a comparison, your grocery stores today have about 30,000. So if you go into Walmart, we're talking lots of stuff. Lots and lots and lots of stuff that we have to choose from. But back then, 1,000 things, that was a lot of stuff. It was better than, you know, going to your neighbor to borrow some eggs. A lot of things. Okay, inventions and new stuff. This is Robert Goddard. In 1914, he created the first rocket. Now, that may look, I apologize, I'm tired of my, this is Dino's computer, and it doesn't like me. Yes?
So yesterday we went to a museum and it had all these rocket ships and it actually said, and like had that as a rocket ship, like across the
Really? So you've seen this already. So it might look like a kid science experiment at this point, but this is basically man going to the moon started right here. This was the beginning. This was the principles that made the rocket. And of course, they called it the rocket ship, spaceship, if you think about it, because it was a ship that sailed up into the sky. Oh, thanks. That's a good idea. What kind of books So books that came out this decade, some of them, were The Secret Garden. If you haven't read that, I highly recommend it. It's an excellent, excellent book. Tarzan, Man of the Apes, that came out if you were into sensationalism. And Pollyanna, the girl who had a cheerful attitude and always looked on the bright side. Considering this decade, it was a good idea. All right, politics. Now, Teddy Roosevelt. Somebody remember why Teddy Roosevelt became president in 1901? Oh.
Because the president before him got assassinated.
Whose name was? Daniel? McKinley. McKinley got shot. He died 8 days later. And Roosevelt became president. This is an interesting quote I thought you might like to see. The attitude about immigration. You remember last decade there were millions and millions and millions of immigrants coming in from countries all over the world because they wanted the American dream. They wanted to be able to make money, make something of themselves. Well, here was Teddy Roosevelt's attitude about immigrants and what it meant to be an immigrant. He said, "There can be no divided allegiance here. Any man who says he is an American, but something else also, isn't an American at all. We have room for but one flag, the American flag. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. And we have room for but one sole loyalty, and that is a loyalty to the American people. And in return, those who became citizens would be treated like full American citizens, not like somebody who came from somewhere else." Now, you may agree with this statement or not agree with this statement, and if we were in debate class, we'd spend some time talking about this. But remember, as we talked about last week, don't look at then through the eyes of today. Today, people are like, celebrate your heritage, celebrate your culture, embrace it, all these things. Like my grandpa was an immigrant. His family immigrated from Spain. He spoke Spanish, but we never learned to speak Spanish. I wish we had. But there was an attitude several generations back that if you were coming to America, you need to be an American. And so a lot of families where the adults only spoke Swiss or Spanish or German or whatever it was, they wanted their kids to succeed in this new country. So they were like, no, we're only speaking English in this house. And so the kids grew up only learning English and not learning their home language. And you can decide whether that's good or bad, but remember, this is a different time. This is not now, this is then. So if you want to know if it was good or bad then, study. Find out. Look into it. Yes?
Do you want to know something interesting about the assassination of the former president?
Which one?
The president before
McKinley?
Roosevelt.
McKinley?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A guy, apparently the night that he got assassinated, had a dream after being fired from the bar he was working at, that the dead president was telling him his murderer was Teddy Roosevelt. And he actually tried to assassinate Teddy Roosevelt during one of his speeches, but he had his speech tucked into his coat pocket, so it kind of stopped the bullet. So he went on to continue his speech and ended it. That's not going to stop the Bull Moose, because that's just his campaign. He was
the Bull Moose Party, that's correct. Interesting. Some weird people out there. So Teddy Roosevelt did become the president when the president became assassinated, and then in 1904 he actually got elected in and of himself. So he got reelected, so people liked him. And then throughout the next 4 years, this guy, rather large dude over here, is named Howard Taft. And Teddy decided basically that he wanted him to be the next president, so he kind of groomed him and worked him up and promoted him so that he would win the next election. Well, he did. So Howard Taft became the president, and then over the next 4 years, Teddy left and went hunting and whatever he was doing, but he didn't like the way Taft was running the country, and so in 1912 he came back and ran against him. Didn't work out so well, but I think it was pretty fun. This is what happens. This is 1912, which is in our decade, when Teddy Roosevelt came back to run against this other guy because he wanted to take the country back and do it the way he wanted it run. But the problem was, Taft was running for the Republican Party. And so Roosevelt, he decided to create this new party, this like progressive thing, and they called it the Bull Moose Party. Long story, if you want to know, write it down and look it up. And so the problem is, when you've got two guys on the same side running for the same side, it splits the votes and rarely ever succeeds. And that's what happened. As you can see, all these blues, that's the ones that Woodrow Wilson won. Taft won the red one. He was not very popular at that point. And Roosevelt won the green. Not doing so well. So Woodrow Wilson he got in. And he got in, you know, with a lot of votes. Now, what about Woodrow Wilson? I didn't really know anything about him, but he's an interesting guy. His father was a minister, so I don't know if you noticed, but there's kind of a pattern here with these presidents at the time. Okay. His father was a Presbyterian minister, so now we've had a Methodist, an Episcopalian, and a Presbyterian. 3 in a row. I don't know about Taft. I don't know what he was. His father was a pastor in the Civil War in Augusta, Georgia, which is just an hour and a half down the road. And he got his doctorate at Johns Hopkins University. He went to Princeton, which is a Presbyterian school. God damn, what in the world is your computer doing?
No, that's the PowerPoint.
He actually became the president of Princeton College in 1902, which means he must have had some good leadership skills, which is nice. He was a Democrat. He campaigned on a program called the New Freedom, which basically stressed states' rights and individual responsibility. So if you remember, Teddy Roosevelt was all about the government needs to take care of the people. So he was big government, and this guy's like, no, 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 we need to have states doing their own thing, that sort of thing. He did do, in 1916, he did create a law about child labor. That's good. That helped. Another actually limited the railroad workers to an 8-hour day, which was very significant. If you're used to working 6-10 hours a day, getting an 8-hour day is a good thing, unless you really need the money. He also, he kind of won on the slogan of, he kept us out of the war. So at this point, the war has already started, and America's not in it. America doesn't want to be in it. We're like, this is not our problem, that sort of thing. And so people liked him because he was going to keep us out of the war. Unfortunately, he got, well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what you think, he got elected, and then in 1917, we joined the war. Whether he intended to do that or not, study and find out. All right, so the good, the bad, and the weird. Here we go. The good. This is Billy Sunday. Billy Sunday was an extremely famous preacher. And the thing that he was really famous for was the fact that he was a professional baseball player before he became a preacher. He was very dramatic, and when he spoke, he was not like your typical former preachers, okay? Typical former preachers standing at the podium, talking about things, preaching, and maybe he got worked up or something, but he stayed right here in his little box. Billy Sunday preached like a baseball player. He would climb up on chairs. He would go sliding across the stage. He'd be telling all these dramatic things and yelling and doing all this stuff. And so, of course, he was a very popular, interesting person to watch. You could probably get online and maybe even hear some of his sermons if you look hard enough on YouTube. So, even the newspapers and the culture, everybody's talking about Billy Sunday. He was something worth talking about. Former hero of Chicago baseball comes here to save the souls. He was an evangelist, and a lot of people got saved under Billy Sunday. Here is one of his meetings. As you can see, there are a lot of people here. This was near Mother's Day. 7,000 handkerchiefs raised in honor of the mothers. All right, the bad. Now, I told you this is a decade of great large-scale tragedy, so expect it to be bad from here on out. All right. This is factory workers in the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. They built Shirtwaist, which was those shirts that girls used to wear, stopped here, and they had the big mutton sleeves that they would wear to work and whatever. It was a company, factory that made clothes. Well, the girls that worked there, it was up, I believe, on the 8th floor. And to make sure the girls didn't leave when they didn't want them to, they would lock the doors and lock them in. Well, the fire started in the factory, and you can imagine a factory full of thread and clothing and things like that. It started spreading very, very quickly. The doors were locked. They couldn't get out. And those that could get out, the fire escape collapsed because it was old and worn out. So these girls were trapped. Basically, a bunch of them died in the fire. A bunch of them died jumping. It was a horrible tragedy. It was 146 girls that died in this fire. And it brought to national attention the fact that we don't have laws to protect these poor factory workers. These poor immigrants are getting horribly mistreated. We need to do something about it. Daniel.
Wasn't that called the Chicago Fire or something?
There was a Chicago fire that was different. This is the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. There is one of those books is about that. That's how I learned about it. which, by the way, Mrs. Nelson brought her amazing collection of Dear America books. They're all about different time periods. You may take one home and read it. Just bring it back next week. Thou must bringest it back next week, or expect me to find you. They're fabulous books. That's how I learned a lot of my favorite things about history. Okay, so they started making some new laws about fire safety. That's good. It would have been nice if they had done it before all the girls had died. But what you're finding during this time period is there's bad work conditions, there's bad safety stuff, even the medical system. This is people watching. This is like good. It's nice, it's clean, it's pristine. So they would do surgeries and things, and the guys in the school would watch, which is a good idea. That's a good idea. So that's a good part of it. Bad part of it. These are cocaine poop drops for kids who are teething. This is a really, really, really bad idea, people. So what happened was there was no laws regulating what kind of medicine was okay and what kind of medicine was not okay. So you could get cough syrup that had heroin or opium or alcohol or, all these terrible things right over the counter. And so you can imagine the people that died, the people got horribly addicted, et cetera, because there weren't the laws. So in 1920, they came out with the Dangerous Drug Act. Thank you very much. This should go right on it. But people just didn't know. They didn't know what was good and what was bad. And remember, this is the time of them inventing all these new things. So it's like, hey, guess what? There's a new drug. Let's try it. Hey, this works. It makes people feel better. Well, let's have more. If this is good, more is better, right? And now you've got all these people who are horribly addicted, or they're dead, or, bad stuff. So they're trying. They're getting there, but they ain't there yet. All right. The Titanic. Here we go. The Titanic was man's great achievements. It was super hyped up. Everybody was excited about this. It was like the big, 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 big deal. It was created to be a luxury liner, meaning it was a ship for rich people in general. Rich person, if you wanted to ride on the Titanic. Now remember, this is its maiden voyage, which what that means is it's its very first trip. So here's this big historical thing that everybody's talking about. So if you're rich, you want to be on it, so you can tell all your friends, I was on the Titanic, thank you very much. Unfortunately, a lot of those people who wanted to brag about it didn't get to brag about it. So, if you wanted to buy a first-class ticket, say you were rich, your first-class ticket would range anywhere from $150 to $4,350. That's in 1912. So what that translates out to be now is anywhere from $1,700 to $50,000 for a ticket on a boat. The $50,000 one was for a two-room states room where you were like the king of the world, kind of like a penthouse kind of thing. And you should see these rooms. I'm going to show them to you in a second. I'll just show them to you now. Okay, so you notice the way people are dressed. This is a picture of the Titanic. They're still wearing their dresses. They've got a parasol to cover their face, so they don't get freckles. The hats, the guys are wearing the straw hats with the little thing around them, like if you ever see a barbershop quartet, this is the time. And they're wearing suits. Everybody's dressed up. This is a big deal. It's super fancy. You can see the people up here. A bunch of people came to see them off because it was a big historic event. And you see these lifeboats? They're important. All right, this is the size of the Titanic and why it was such a huge, big deal. So this is a Boeing 747. If you've ever seen one of those, it's pretty large. This is the Titanic. Now, this is the Queen Mary, which I think was down the road. This is the Empire State Building. So if you've ever seen the Empire State Building and been like, whoa, that's huge. Well, if you lay it on its side, that's what we're talking about. This was a big, big, big boat. Very big boat. And it was unsinkable. That's what they called it, because they had made it in this very special way, modern and high-tech and all that stuff, that it had these sections on the bottom that held the boilers and long story, blah, blah, blah. It's the technical stuff. But basically, they separated the sections so that even if somebody rammed them or something like that and one or two of the sections got broken into, the rest of the ship was still okay because it was sectioned off. That comes into play very importantly in a little bit. The vice president of the White Star Line, which is the company that the Titanic was. There's no danger the Titanic will sink. The boat is unsinkable, and nothing but inconvenience will be suffered by the passengers. I'm thinking this is what he said when they hit. He was wrong. Okay. So to take a look at the Titanic and how it's made up, this is one idea. You've got the first class lounge up here. You've got the first class bedrooms here. Second class, some second class stuff. Swimming pool, racket court, gymnasium. And then your third class people are shoved way down here. This is important. Your third class people were often immigrants and poor. So even still, a third class ticket today would cost you $400. But this is going from your country to another country. So you probably gave all your life savings or you saved up for a really long time to be able to do this. But there was a law in 1912, the Immigration Act, that said those people needed to be kept separate so they wouldn't spread infectious diseases. Well, no segregation there. So basically, they're looking for lice, they're looking for pneumonia, they're looking for anything like that. And so during this ship, their rooms were way down here, for one, because they're poor, and for another, they had to keep separate from all these other people. Very interesting. So if you... Hello? That's interesting. All right, so the rooms were separated. Well, Daniel, you're not going to play. There you go. Nobody. As you can see, so here is the ship. These are these boiler rooms that I'm talking about. They got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And your first class is all up here. All these blue are first class things. Happy first class. Remember, this is a luxury ship, so that's what it was for. It was for the rich people to feel rich and happy. And then we've got some second class stuff over here, and then you got a little third class, and a little third class, and a little third class. You got cargo down here. Cargo crew would be stuffed over here in the front, and you know, other stuff, engine rooms, that sort of things. So it was set up for the rich people. And we're not talking rich people like, hey, I'm doing pretty good. We're talking rich people. These are the kind of rich people who got tickets. So this is what their houses look like. We're talking millionaires, multi-millionaires, the people who owned, you know, the car factories and things like that. This, I'm going to show you some of the actual rooms in the Titanic. These are probably remakes, but they have pictures and all that kind of stuff. The staircase, the dining hall for the rich people, another dining hall for the rich people. This is a boat. The gymnasium, in case you wanted to stretch your limbs in your dress and your makeup. This is a second class family. So the second class passengers, their tickets were about $700. So it wasn't so bad, but even still, I mean, that's a lot of money. So your average American middle class might have worked on second class, might have been a little lower, I'm not sure. So these people were pretty normal. And the third class, this was their hangout room compared to the first class hangout room. They're not getting a lot of attention. They're not getting a lot of special stuff. It's kind of like airplanes, economy, you know, there's like kind of thing here. This is a third class bedroom. So for some of the third class passengers, they actually had to bunk with other people they didn't even know. So they're hanging out with a bunch of other people squashed in this little room, while first class passengers get, you know, the whole world. Very fascinating. So this is your third class passengers getting checked for various, you know, medical issues, I guess, to see if they're allowed to come home. Okay, back to those boilers. What happened? All right. So if you don't know, the Titanic hit an iceberg and sunk. You need to know that. That's important. All right. So they're going, and they're going too fast. There's all kinds of factors that went into this whole tragedy thing. It's worth studying. So they're going along. They're going too fast because they're trying to make up the time. It's the first, you know, it's the first one, and blah, 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 blah. The guy sees an iceberg. Iceberg! So they start trying to turn away from the iceberg. Interestingly enough, if they had hit the iceberg head on, the ship would have made it. But they didn't. They tried to turn and missed it, and because they turned and missed it, the iceberg went like that, just like key in a car. And what it did was it poked through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. Now remember, they made it on purpose so that even if 1 or 2 or 3, even 4 had gotten busted, the ship would be okay, but it got 5. And because it got 5, that was the end. So the unsinkable ship was starting to sink. Now, people didn't believe it. Okay, so they hit an iceberg. People were like, bonk. What was that? Oh, goodness. Okay, and we do the whole, let's not create a panic. And so, unbelievable. Who has the one where her husband came in and said, we've hit an iceberg, but it's okay? Who has that on your little paper? Check your papers. You don't have a little paper.
No, I was talking about
Oh, one of those?
Okay.
All right. So who has a paper where the husband came in and said, we hit an iceberg?
It's me.
All right, what does it say?
What do you think? We have struck an iceberg, a big one, but there is no danger. An officer just told me so.
There you go. What do you think, dear? We've hit an iceberg, but nothing to worry about. No problems. So you've got all these rich people who are like, oh dear, we hit something. That's very interesting. But we don't want to go stand outside because it's really cold. So then they start saying, okay, there's a problem here. We should probably get people in their life jackets because we're starting to tilt a little bit. But it's okay. Everything's okay. You know, blah, blah, blah. Well, the rich people, you know, it's like, I don't want to put on a life jacket. It'll mess up my hair or something. And, you know, go out, stand outside. And then I don't want to go stand outside because it's cold. These are people who are used to having everybody do everything for their comfort. So they don't want to be uncomfortable. It's really quite interesting. So they got these lifeboats. They did not have enough lifeboats for the passengers. As in hundreds of people. Not enough. It was an unsinkable ship, see? So they could save money by making less lifeboats.
They only brought half, right?
It was about half. So the captain knew this. The guys in charge knew this. So you can't do the everybody get on a lifeboat because there's not enough. They already know about half the people on this ship are going to die. What do you do? Pride goes before a fall, right? So they're starting to, okay, we need to get on the lifeboats, blah, blah. Now, at that time, the culture, you know, people will be like, oh, women were so oppressed back then and all that kind of stuff. Well, one thing they don't talk about is the men, even though, yes, they did think of themselves as the leaders of their family and the head of their home, they also honored women, as the weaker vessel, which, you know, the feminists will hate that. But they treated women as precious. Not weak as in like, oh, you little weakling, wussy person. More like something fragile, like a glass thing. If you have a mug that's made out of plastic and you have a mug that's made out of crystal, you're going to treat them differently, right? And so they were treating women as if they're, you know, special, fragile. They did treat them like they were a little stupid sometimes, but, you know. So the thing was women and children first. That was the standard honor code. If there was any kind of crisis, if there was any kind of tragedy, it was women and children first. So that's what's going on in this boat. They're like women and children first. Well, they're getting the first class passengers on the boat. Some of the boats, they were telling them things like, just get on the boat and you go on ahead. Your husband will come later because this, you know, the boat's not going to sink. It's just a precaution. So some of them didn't even want to get on the boats and some of them did get on the boats. Some of the boats left half full. Ugh. And what about those third class people way down in the bottom? Who's telling them? What about the second class people way down at the bottom? Who's telling them? What's going on here? You know, it was kind of chaos. There were a lot of people who revealed themselves to be heroes that day. There were a lot of people who revealed themselves to be cowards. Crisis brings out who you really are. But facing death is that's a crisis. And you find out what you're really made of. And there were a lot of men who were strong that day and who were heroic that day and got their women and children on the boat and sent them off and never saw them again. So this is what it looked like because the lifeboats were up here and of course this boat's humongous, so they had to lower them down by ropes, little bit by little bit by little bit, and all sorts of interesting things happened. Fun. Okay, who died? Well, a lot of people. Of the 2,200 passengers, 1,500 died that day. Only about 700 of them made it. This was a tragedy on so many levels. It was a tragedy because of the lifeboats. It was a tragedy because they sent out distress signals and there was a ship, but the guy was asleep. There were tragedies because they did flares. And I'm pretty sure another ship saw them and didn't know what the flares were for, so they just ignored it. There were tragedies because the ship that did want to help and did come it took them too long, and they came an hour after all these people died of hypothermia. There were just so many wrong things that happened that shouldn't have happened. So what happened was 68% of the people on this ship died that day, one way or the other. But if you look, you can see how the class system works. The reason we're talking about the Titanic so much today is I feel like the Titanic encapsulates the culture of that decade. It encapsulates the status and the way things worked and the way they trusted in man-made stuff a little bit too much, and they didn't have good rules about safety and that sort of thing. And if you don't know what the word encapsulate means, you have the opportunity to be smarter. Write it down. Look it up when you get home. So that's why we're studying this, because it encapsulates kind of the whole decade and the mindset of the decade and how things just really went wrong. The first and second class passengers, it's only about half. The third class passengers, it's 3/4 didn't make it. And that just tells you a lot about the way the system worked and the way people thought about things. The crew, it was even more than 3/4 that didn't make it. That was their job to kind of stay. And if you did women and children first, of course, most of the men on the crew were men. Most of the men on the crew were men. All of the men on the crew were men. Woo, okay, whoops. Okay, are you ready to find out if you made it or not? So get your paper out. And get your person.
Everybody first class?
You have a story on yours. I'm going to let about 4 of you read your interesting story. Let's see. What's yours?
Charles Light Toller, second officer, making sure that the women and children of first school was kept on board on the ship and sort of did it thing.
Okay, so Charles, his job was to get people on the boats. That was his job. So he got women and children on. He made sure it was women and children and guys were sleeping on the boats. And he planned to go down with the ship. And he sort of did. So we'll find out what happened to him. What's your name?
It's
Lawrence Beasley, science teacher. He was on the second class. By the way, when it says class, it doesn't mean what grade they're in. It means whether they're first class, second class, or third class. He was reading in his cabin, and he didn't know that the ship had hit an iceberg at all. We'll find out what happened to him. Rachel, what did yours say?
Violet Ocean liner stewardess was ordered to help the non-English-speaking passengers into lifeboats. Less than a year earlier, she had been aboard the RMS Olympic when it collided with the HMS Taft, a British warship that tore a massive hole in the luxury liner's side.
So Violet, poor girl, she'd already been in one shipwreck. She was on the Olympia when it got run into by another ship, and she survived, and now here she is on the Titanic. She's probably like, good grief, come on. And her job was to help the non-English speaking people. That's great, because if you think about a lot of these third-class passengers, if they're immigrating and they don't know English, what are you going to do? I mean, the ship's going like this, and you don't know what's going on or how to get up to the top. You're like 5 floors down. So having someone to help them, that's good. Good job, Violet. Way to go. Let's see, who else has a story?
Thomas Anderson, Titanic designer, members of the group responsible for checking over Titanic maiden voyage, fixing any small snugs remain cold.
Okay, Mr. Anderson, you're the one who designed this thing, and it's your job to fix things that go wrong. How do you think things turned out for you? Who else has a story? Jamie, yours looks long. What's yours say?
Ida Stratus, traveling with her husband, German-born out-of-the-door Stratus, rose from poverty to become the co-owner of Macy's department store and a Democratic member of the U.S. House of Representatives.
Okay, so her husband, he was a poor German guy. He got to be rich. He was the co-founder of Macy's, which is still around today. So now they're rich and political, and she's his wife. Were they first class, second class, or third class? First class. All right. What you got? Joshua?
Bill Bragg, one of the 2 men who sent SOS signals that called the ship that rescued survivors.
Ooh, one of the guys. Where's the other guy? Daniel, you got him?
Jack Phillips' crew sent distress signals to the airship.
Carpathia. All right. Who else has a story? What's your say?
Michael Navarrete, age 12, second class in the Titanic was torn up.
Oh, we've got these tiny little twins. Where's the other twin? Who's on with his twin brother and his father? Okay.
Mitchell Mann, second class, newly divorced, sailing with
Okay, so there's these 3-year-old twins. How much of a chance do 3-year-olds have of making it? 3-year-old twins, they're sailing with their father who just got divorced, and he got custody of the kids, and he's taking the kids to America to start a new life. Daniel, what's your say?
Frederick Fleet,
Right.
25-year-old crewman, one of the 5 lookouts, made the famous call to the bridge, iceberg dead ahead.
He became famous because he was the one who called it. Oh, I know what happens to him. Okay, who else has a story? Chloe.
Lucy Duff Gordon, first class, very high society. When the ship started sinking, Lucy and her husband were among the first on boat 1.
Interesting, Lucy, first class. Her husband got on boat 1 too. What's that tell you about this little couple? Interesting. All right, who else has a story? Yeah, Steve.
William McFillan, Titanic stoker, occupation it is to tend the fire for the running of the boiler, heating a building, or powering a steam engine. Much of the job is hard physical labor, such as shoveling fuel, typically coal, into the boiler start box.
Okay, so while the rich people are upstairs eating bonbons or whatever they were doing, the boiler room guys were down at the bottom shoveling coal as fast as they could to keep the ship going. And when the boiler started bursting, the guys down there, their job was to try and keep the ship going as long as possible before it sank. Don't think things are going to turn out so well for you, sorry. For your person, not for you. No. Anybody else got a story? All right. Are you ready to find out what happened to you? Well, to your person, not to you. Don't be distressed. All right. Survived. If you are Lillian, or Madeline Astor, or Malaka Ata'ala, or Leontine, Pauline, Marjorie, Elsie, Lawrence Beasley, Violet made it. So she survived 2 shipwrecks. She got to be pretty famous. Eliza Dean's brother. How many of you are not on here? We're going to talk about you guys. All right. So, unfortunately, all these guys didn't make it. So the guy who designed the Titanic didn't make it, and neither did the captain. He went down with his ship. The guys in the boiler room didn't make it, but they helped save lives. So good job. Okay. Yes? Yes. All right. So now you're going to find out about a few of these people. Molly Brown, where's she? Margaret Brown. All right. She's one of the most famous survivors of the Titanic. She was known as the unsinkable Molly Brown. In fact, they went on to make a movie about her. You can watch it probably somewhere. But she was an interesting one because she wasn't rich to start with. She married a guy who ended up becoming rich. So she was like your down-home country girl who happened to get really, really rich. And so the movies often portray her as just being this kind of like, well, you know, what do you know? But she was on the boat, and the reason she became famous was she was on one of the boats that was out there, and when the Titanic sank, there were people in the water everywhere, and they were screaming, and that's what people remember probably the most about the sinking was just the screaming of all those people. And she's like, we need to go back. Our boat's not full. We need to pick up survivors. A bunch of the boats did not go back because they were afraid they would get overrun, and it would tip the boat, and they'd all die. So out of fear for themselves, they didn't save anybody else, which is horrible. So Molly Brown, that wasn't her style. She threatened to the guy who was in charge of sailing that boat, she threatened to throw him overboard if he didn't go back and look for survivors. I'm like, she's awesome. So I think they even literally helped row themselves, the women who normally wouldn't do such things, and like, grab an oar, let's go do something, let's save people. Out of all the people who went into the water, only 6 were rescued. By the time the boats got there, the cold had gotten to them, and they died of hypothermia. Ida Strauss, the one with the husband. Her husband wanted her to get on a boat, but she said, where you go, I go, and she stayed with him. The boys who did the SOS signals, they made it. Oddly enough, they didn't plan on it. So, actually, Jack Phillips, he got onto a life raft, but then he died before they got rescued. Sorry about that. Who was the other guy? Charles Lightoller. Okay, get this. He was on the Titanic as it went into the water when there were no lifeboats left. So even as his feet got below the surface, he was trapped against a grate when the boiler exploded and it threw him up to the surface. So he swam to an overturned collapsible boat where about 30 people were hanging on. And he joined them, and he showed them, he probably saved all their lives, how to get on the boat and shift their weight. They're staying on an upside-down boat here. How to shift their weight to keep it from falling.
Okay.
Even in the swells. So turn right, turn left, all that kind of stuff. And he kept them going. He was the last survivor to step foot on the rescue ship that reached them at dawn. In the aftermath, Lightoller made a number of recommendations for better safety measures and tighter regulations to prevent similar disasters in the future. Many of his suggestions are now maritime law. Good job, Charles. All right, let's see who else. William McQuillan, where was he? It is you. You did make it. Okay, so here's is one of the weirdest stories I've ever heard in my life. For 93 years, everybody thought you were dead because nobody heard a thing about you. Okay, so 93 years later, in August 2005, your granddaughter, Marjorie Wilson, was watching a TV documentary and spotted a gravestone of a W. McQuillan in footage at this cemetery in Nova Scotia. And when they talked about his age and his address, she was like, "That's my grandpa." So you survived and you went off and lived in Nova Scotia till who knows when, and that's all we know. Okay. Whatever. Frederick Fleet. He survived. He always said he could have prevented it if he'd had a pair of binoculars, which they had asked for and not been given. So 1,500 people could have been saved if they hadn't been stingy and given him a pair of binoculars. Lucy. Hello, Snotty Lucy. Her husband got on the boat with her, and people fussed at him about that, but I guess he didn't really care. So they both survived, but she actually turned out to be fortunate again. She was going to go on the Lusitania and canceled her trip. Good idea, Lucy.
You know, actually, the sister ship to Titanic sunk too.
The two twins, you guys, the 3-year-olds, their dad put them on a boat. The dad did not make it. But the little ones, this one's just amazing, okay? The little boy, the one of them, even though he was only 3, he remembers what his dad said. His dad said, "My child, when your mother comes for you, as she surely will, tell her that I loved her dearly and still do. Tell her I expected her to follow us so that we might all live happily together in the peace and freedom of the new world." Well, the thing is, the 2 little boys, 3 months old, they didn't know English. Well, they're 3 months old. They don't know anything. And so they were orphans, and they got, taken to America, of course, but some French lady took them in and was taking care of them for a while. But fortunately, they got to be famous, and they were in the newspapers. And their mom in France saw them, saw a picture of them, and she saw her kids, and she found out what happened. And so she sailed to America, and she found her kids, and it was okay for them. Charlotte Collier. Does anybody have her? It's you. She was forced onto a lifeboat by her husband. She survived. But she died of tuberculosis 2 years later. Sorry. I don't know what happened to her. Was she on the list? Yes. We can look back and see what happened to her. Okay. Noelle Leslie. Who has her? She was a high-class lady who was very elegant and very beautiful, but proved herself to be heroic. She manned the tiller on Lifeboat 8. She rowed. She took the helm for more than an hour before stepping down to console a newlywed whose husband had been lost. She gave her fellow passengers comfort, led them in songs, and saw them through one of the darkest nights of their lives. She didn't stop caring for passengers even when they boarded the Carpathia. She looked after women and children, especially the poorest ones, and sewed clothes for babies. That's nice. Last one. Harold Bride and Jack Phillips, the distress signal boys. All right. They were sending distress signals. They knew the Carpathia wouldn't be able to come until the Titanic sank. So they worked frantically until the captain came and told them they were relieved of duty. The ship had nearly lost power and there were only 2 lifeboats left. So they made a run for the collapsible B. There were some collapsible boats. And were just into it when a wave swept across the deck, knocking them both in the ocean. Bride and 15 others scrambled onto the sinking collapsible boat and survived until other lifeboats collected them and took them to the Carpathia. Once aboard the Carpathia, Bride got back to work and began helping the ship's wireless officer send messages from the other Titanic survivors to tell people they had made it. Bravo. Well done. Let's see, who else do we have? This is the youngest survivor of, what was her name? Who's the one? She was 2 months old. That you? What you got? What's her name?
Eliza Dean, 2 months old, youngest passenger on board 3rd class.
She was also the very last survivor alive, understandably so. Of course, she doesn't remember it, but she got to be very famous for being the Titanic Baby. And this is the guy I want to tell you about. John Harper. He was a Scottish Baptist minister. He had a 6-year-old daughter and a niece on the boat. He had already lost his wife. She died having birth. When the ship went down, he put his daughter and his niece on the boat. And then he spent the rest of his time telling people about Jesus so that they could get saved before they died. He went down with the ship telling people about Jesus. And then he would swim from person to person saying, "Is your soul saved? Is your soul saved?" The reason we know about this man is because one of the 6 that got picked up, remember how I told you there were only 6? One of the 6, he came up to him and he tried to get him to get saved, basically, get saved before it's too late. And he refused, and he went off and he told other people, and he came back to him a second time and begged with him to get right with God, and he did. And he said, "I was the last convert of John Harper." I'd say that's a pretty awesome way to die. Can you imagine going to heaven and here's all these people who showed up with you because you told them, because you thought about them instead of yourself? I just think that's beautiful. So if you want, you can study more about him. It's really fascinating. And his little daughter, who was 6, she did survive. She grew up and she married a guy who ended up becoming a preacher too. Yes.
There's still some people you haven't mentioned. Yeah.
Who's left?
First of all, Eliza Dean's mother.
Eliza Dean's mother made it. Who else? Anybody else? Yeah.
I don't know how to say his name.
Give it a shot.
Miss Michaela Alta.
Oh, yeah, she was on the list. What you got? L.D. Bowerman. They were on the list. Back here. All right. Eliza Dean's father didn't make it. Eliza Dean's brother did. The Malaka Ata'ala, she made it. Yeah.
So, on this, it says my dad, but you said my dad.
What's your guy's name?
Michael.
Oh, sorry, that's the dad. He didn't make it. But there was a Michael now already. There's Michael and there's Michael Jr. You're Junior, you made it. Congratulations. Okay. Which one? Marjorie Collier. She's not on here.
Margaret Collier, she's survived.
Oh, goody. Congratulations, you made it. So she and Charlotte must have been sisters, and they made it together. So, all right. Attention up. I told you last week that we can learn from history, both the good and the bad of it. So, I'm going to ask you, from this history that you learned this week, what is something bad that we can learn from? What can we learn from some of the bad junk? What?
The Titanic, and that they need at least as many lifeboats as they have passed through.
Absolutely.
Maybe even no more.
I'm pretty sure that after this, that was a law from here on out. Yes?
Never build a giant boat and say it's unsinkable.
Absolutely. Let him that thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. That's Bible. Yes?
Cocaine toothbrush.
Just because somebody sells it doesn't mean it's good for you. Yes?
Is it cocaine illegal to import?
I hope so. Yes?
That they made laws against the after the birth thing, they made themselves not to.
Yes. So let's make some laws that keep people safe, like the fire laws for the shirtwaist, and now the laws for the medicine, and then the laws for the boats. This was a time when people were figuring out, there's a problem here, and maybe we should start regulating some of this stuff.
Wait, how long did it take to say that it would do that?
About an hour and a half, I believe.
From the rip.
Maybe I actually said what I was going to say. Do you know that the twin sister of the Titanic actually sank in
The Olympia? And there's a conspiracy on insurance stuff and the Olympia and the Titanic and all that kind of stuff. We want to get into it. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that.
Okay, stop.
There was a lot of
dangerous things, more powerful and dangerous things, and I guess that people didn't really think about what these things could do for bad. Then also, I mean, they're made for good, but they could do really bad things too, and they just never thought of that.
Well said. So being aware of the consequences of what you're doing and thinking beyond just the thing that you want it to do to also other possibilities. What is something good that we can learn from any of this?
Regulations are a good thing.
Regulations are a good thing. They can be anyway.
I actually, that's something.
Is it something good that we can learn?
Yeah, the other, it's just it was, what we looked at last week with all the inventions and stuff, like how you talked about, you can also notice, don't take too big 3 weeks there. Everybody's come, like you said, come out with all this cool stuff, like all ice cream, iced tea, stuff like that, and they have this giant unsinkable ship. And this, I think it was kind of like the wake up era.
Okay. And a lot of people did die. It's like when you study history, you're like, oh, we're right. That's great. They flew. And it doesn't tell you about all the people who tried to fly before them and died. Like, literally. So, like, Benjamin Franklin and his key, I mean, that's not this era, but, you know, the electricity thing, a guy had tried that experiment before him and died. But you don't know about that. You just know about Benjamin Franklin. Daniel. I would love to have heard him.
One thing is, I've heard about Titanic is that the music crew went down on music and an escape.
Yes. The guys who played in the little orchestra played all the way as the ship was sinking, and that one of the songs they played was "Near My God to Thee." So every time I hear that, I think of the Titanic. That was pretty brave of them. Some really awesome people showed up, and I would love for you to learn more about it. There is actually a movie, and I'm not talking about the 1990s one. There is a movie that was made in the 50s, the 1950s. It was called A Night to Remember. I'm sending a link to your parents because it's free on YouTube to watch. It is the best movie on the Titanic I've ever seen. It's pretty historically accurate, and several of the people on our list are in that movie. The guys with the signals, the guy who did the balancing on top of the boat, Ida Strauss, Victoria, she might be in there, I don't remember. But it was fun because I looked up all these people and figured all this out, and then we watched the movie and I was like, oh, there's so-and-so, and oh, there's so-and-so, and it was really neat because I knew what happened to them. So it's very well done, and it also presents from more of the perspective of like what we would say our perspective is. It's more of when the stuff's going down, instead of all this sensationalism and romance and blah, 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 people in the different boats are quoting the Lord's Prayer. I think it's more like what it really was instead of like what Hollywood wants to make it. See, history is always told from a perspective. Remember that. And if somebody doesn't want to keep God in history, they're going to tell you history without the God parts. Well, in this class, you're going to learn the God parts. That's why you learn about Teddy Roosevelt talking about his faith in Jesus Christ. That's why you learn about McKinley's last words being about God's will being done. That's why you are going to learn about John Harper. He's not in the movie, but you can study him yourself if you want to. So, on the back of your sheet is your homework for this week. And again, same thing. You can either answer those questions on that sheet, or you can pick one question and write me a one-page paper. So you're going to learn about George Washington Carver. You're going to learn about James Thorpe and why he was wearing 2 different shoes. Very interesting story. And you're going to learn about whatever the other question is. So that's it for this week. I know you want to go play games. Have a great one. See you next Wednesday. Homework goes up here.